Hey, what up, everyone, and welcome back to the Chronic Brew. Welcome back. All right. Last time we had a heavy but necessary conversation about chronic fatigue and introduced the spoon theory. That helped us recognize that our energy is a precious but also limited budget. And if you listened, you know how quickly those spoons can vanish. Okay. So today, we move from recognition to action. We're about to roll up our sleeves to discuss the most courageous work in chronic living, which is defending your spoons. We're tackling the uncomfortable but essential truth that this episode's advice on setting firm boundaries and finding the courage to ask for help is going to get some of us in trouble. I already feel the text messages coming in, the phone calls. Yo, Mr. Cool Beans, we got to talk, man. I already feel it. I know it's coming. But that trouble is necessary because for too long we've quietly carried the burden and hidden our limits. This episode is finally saying what needs to be said, loudly and clearly, just to protect our health and define our own terms for survival. So, with all that being said, you know the deal. Let's take a sip and get right into it. Welcome to the brew.
You are now tuned into the Chronic Brew podcast with Mr. Cool Beans. Sharing stories, inspiring others.
And we're back. So glad that you're here, peeps. After that open, I know some of you might be feeling a mix of defiance, a little bit of courage, and maybe even a little bit of fear. And you know what? That's exactly where we need to be right now. We just admitted out loud that for our survival, we have to start saying the things that make other people uncomfortable. The core realization from our last episode was that our energy, or our spoons, that they're finite. But acknowledging that truth is only the first step. The next and much harder step is the work of protecting that resource every single day. If we don't, we're signing up for the boom and bust cycle where we kind of push through today only to pay for it with 3 days of being completely crushed. To me, that cycle is definitely not sustainable and it certainly isn't living. Before we even dive into the practical advice though, I do want to take the time to read a comment that I got from a listener named Jeremy out in Maryland. Okay, I believe this really sums up the wall we hit when it comes to setting limits. The listener writes, "Hey, Mr. Cool Beans, I love the show. I know I need boundaries, but I feel paralyzed every time I try to set one. My sister offered to come over to help with some heavy cleaning, but I know she'll expect us to catch up for 3 hours afterwards, and I just don't have the energy. I ended up just saying no thanks to the cleaning help entirely because I couldn't handle the social pressure. I'd rather struggle alone than to have manage other people's expectations. I feel like such a failure, but it's easier this way." Wow, thank you, Jeremy, for your honesty. And you know what? What you're describing, to me, I think it's not failure. I think it's exactly the reason why we actually need this episode. You threw out the lifeline, the help, just to avoid the extra emotional energy that it required afterwards. That is chronic illness. That is this chronic illness struggle in a nutshell. We sacrifice needs to avoid managing other people's feelings. To be honest, that's definitely the most isolating, rock in a hard place to be in. So, today, with all that being said, we're going to be forging our armor, if you will. Just imagine we're going to be building this armor up, okay? We're going to talk about the practical side of self-defense for your health. And it all starts with a very difficult word. Say it with me. Boundaries, okay? Boundaries. All right, we all know this, okay? Boundaries are the invisible, non-negotiable walls that we build to protect our time, energy, and even peace of mind. But for those of us living with chronic illness, these aren't just polite suggestions we're talking about here, okay? They're the primary defense against the inevitable boom and bust cycle. A little quick reminder, okay? This cycle is when you have a period of feeling like you're feeling yourself, you're feeling really good, right? Relatively well. That's called the boom, right? During which you push yourself too hard, to catch up, on task, work, and social activities. You know who you are. That's you right there, right? Yeah. All right. This overexertion, though, triggers a period of severe symptom flare-ups or even crash. And that's the bust. And that forces you to go into an extended period of mandatory rest and low activity, right? Imagine You spend your boom time pushing your limits only to spend your bust time paying back the debt of that overexertion. I think setting boundaries is essential because it breaks this unsustainable cycle. Okay, setting boundaries is the single most effective thing that helps break this loop. The biggest barrier, I believe, to setting boundaries, and let's just keep it a stack, let's be honest here, is guilt. Okay, that's the biggest barrier. We feel guilty, all right? We feel guilty for disappointing a loved one, for not being the person that we used to be, or for simply not being able to keep up. But you have to shift that perspective, though. All right, we got to shift that. Not setting a boundary guarantees a crash, always. That crash will ultimately disappoint or inconvenience your loved ones far more than a simple, clear no ever would. You're choosing your long-term health over short-term awkwardness, okay? Now, the most challenging boundary or boundaries are usually with people who love us the most. Whether it's your mom, your parents, your friends, your kids, all right? Their intentions are good when they reach out and make plans and stuff like, they want to do. Their intentions are phenomenally great. But their understanding sometimes of our energy limits is often zero. And that's why we have to start with our first one, which is like the time boundary, okay? Time boundary, all right? This is your shield against overcommitment. And I think this applies to just everyone in general, right? Because sometimes we do get a little bit of carried away with this overcommitment business, okay? When you get an invitation, all right, to a concert, invitation to a rodeo, monster truck rally, football game, football party, anything. You don't need a lengthy medical explanation to kind of cop out. You don't need that. All right, my doctor gave this problem. You don't need that. Okay, you just need a simple, firm script. All right. So I came up with a couple for you. Here we go. When you're declining an event, I want you to try this. Say something like, "That sounds lovely, but I have a low energy day planned today. Thank you so much for thinking of me." No need to apologize or over-explain. I know some of us try to coddle and make sure the other person's emotions aren't hurt, but you're thinking about yourself in the situation and how you need to survive, okay? Or even when you're attending but limiting your time, when you go to a Super Bowl party or a hurricane party that we have here in Florida, you want to limit your time over there, you can say something like this. You can say, yeah, I can only stay for an hour, but I really wanted to see you, all right? State the limit up front. If they ask why, a simple firm, I have to manage my energy closely and my limit today is an hour. That's all that's required. If they push you, you simply repeat the boundary and stick to it. All right, no need to try to compromise, and you just stick to it, because at the end of the day, it's you and your health that we're talking about here. Okay? Now, let's look closer to that time boundary. Let's take a little bit closer look to that. Why is it so crucial? All right? Because for us, time isn't just time. I think even a lot of people without chronic illness can agree. Time isn't just time. It's a currency that we don't know how much we have left of it, okay? It's the most direct way to measure your spoons also for those with chronic illness. That's how you measure your spoons. If a friend invites you out for just an hour and you end up staying 3 hours, you didn't just spend 2 extra hours, okay? You spent 2 full hours of physical and I think mental capacity that you absolutely can't reclaim. You can always find more tasks, but show me where you can find more energy though. You can't. See, the time boundary is important because it's a hard stop mechanism that prevents the boom and bust cycle. When you feel good, the temptation is intense. Your internal critic says, you feel great. You can clean the whole kitchen and bake cookies. You could, hook up some jerk chicken. You can do that. But by committing to the time boundary, saying, I will work on this for only 45 minutes and no more, you prevent yourself from borrowing spoons from tomorrow. You are essentially building in a safety net or safety switch for your health. Furthermore, I'm breaking out my college words. Furthermore, it's the clearest boundary for others to respect. Telling someone I need to leave at 8 p.m. is much easier for them to accept than saying, I have to leave when I feel my energy is drained. It removes the ambiguity that often leads to your own guilt or their frustrations, right? By setting a clear time boundary, I think, you are treating your health like the finite, precious resource that it is. And you're prioritizing your sustainable well-term well-being over a temporary moment of feeling capable. All right? Don't just look at yourself and say, man, I could do this, and then you pay for it, and you feel guilty about it, you feel bad about yourself. Like, why did I do all of that? You ever been there before? All right? Then you have that activity boundary. Okay, this manages well-meaning visitors or hosts who expect you to participate fully or host them vigorously. All right, you have to set that expectation before they arrive. For example, let's say you have some folks coming over to your house. You can say something like, "Look, I'm so excited to see you. Just a heads up though, I am having a low energy day, so I might need to lie down while we talk, And don't worry about the mess. The most helpful thing you can do is just sit and relax with me." All right, you're explicitly giving them permission to not demand energy from you. It's a whole different perspective right there. Right? Well, what if you guys are out though? All right, let's say everyone's out and everyone starts walking faster than you because the ticket booth is way over there and we're in a parking lot which is way over that side. You can say something like, hey guys, look, I need to stick to this pace to protect my energy. I'll meet you guys there in a minute. All right, you're prioritizing your body over the group's momentum. If the time boundary is about, the when you stop, the activity boundary is about what you stop doing. This boundary protects your energy from being covertly drained by, the demands or expectations during a committed period. All right, the activity boundary is crucial because it helps you conserve your efforts and manage cognitive load. People don't want to make the connection between the mind and the body. Okay, think about our listener from earlier, Jeremy. All right? He didn't say no to the cleaning help. He said no to the 3 hours of emotional labor, the expectation to catch up and manage his sister's feelings. All right, it separates presence from performance. Okay, yeah, this boundary allows you to be present without being forced to perform. All right, you can attend a friend's party for an hour, right? But also you can set the boundary that you will be sitting down the entire time and will not be participating in moving furniture or chasing children. All right, that's part of that activity boundary. All right, when you have visitors, the activity boundary is what allows you to say, please don't clean for me and don't expect me to entertain you. It's like you're explicitly setting that expectation that their purpose is just company, not work. All right, and by doing that, you're pretty much protecting your emotional and physical spoons from that pressure of hosting. You see, every activity has a hidden cost for someone with chronic illness. Okay, you have, the mental drain of loud environments. You have the physical effort of bending to clean. You have the cost of standing while washing dishes, stuff like that. The activity boundary is your tool for saying, I will only pay the price for the most essential activity that I have right now. And that allows you to strategically spend your energy on what matters the most. Okay, if the time and activity boundaries protect your physical energy, then it only makes sense that the boundary against unsolicited advice protects your emotional spoons. To me, this is absolutely non-negotiable for those long-term health management techniques, okay? But why is this so vital to us, especially folks with CKD or even chronic illness in general? Well, I'd say this, because those unsolicited advice, the have you tried yoga or you just need to think positively, those comments, right? Those comments are almost always rooted in dismissiveness. It suggests on a subtle term, it suggests that your chronic illness is something that you can fix with a simple lifestyle hack, or it implies that the severity of your condition or your suffering, if you will, is somehow your fault or you're not trying hard enough. This kind of advice, quote unquote, it actually forces you to defend your reality, defend your illness, and defend the choices you've already made with your whole entire medical team. Did you even know that defending your reality is a massive drain on your emotional spoons? Every time you have to sit down and educate or justify your choices, you're actually losing energy. So setting this boundary allows you to separate the supportive people from the people who are just trying to make themselves feel better. All right, it's like you're telling the world, my illness is complex, my care is managed by professionals, and I'm not going to spend my limited energy defending my survival to you. Okay, it's the clearest way to protect your peace of mind and your self-respect. And finally, with the boundaries that we're building, I think it's only right that we almost try to keep ourselves accountable here. Okay, we have to talk about the boundaries that we set on our own expectations. Okay, I think this is often the hardest fight because a lot of times the enemy is you. Yes, you. We can be our worst critique. Okay, you need to recognize your limits before you hit them. Straight up. This means consciously stopping when you feel okay, not when you crash. It means looking at your to-do list and deliberately moving 3 items to tomorrow, even if you feel like you have the energy right now. That feeling of having extra energy is what we call borrowed spoons, and they always come with interest. Okay? Chronic illness often intensifies the desire for control. You want to have control over your life, every single aspect of it. You want to make sure you have control over the numbers that you're getting in from the labs. You want to make sure, control is big. Okay? And that leads to a need for perfection all the time. And we're not perfect. You have to set a boundary against that internal critic that demands a sparkling clean house or a perfectly prepared meal. All right? Good enough is the new perfect. That's all a part of giving yourself some grace here. Okay? The boundary against your internal critic is the hardest but most vital shield that you'll ever create. This voice constantly demands perfection and tells you that your fatigue isn't real, driving you back to the boom and bust cycle. You have to set those boundaries, which means consciously choosing compassion over perfectionism. It's the moment where you look at a task and say, you know what? I think I did enough today. My body needs me to rest, and this is an act of self-love and management, not failure. Okay? This is essential because, well, think about it. If you can't protect your energy from your own demands, what makes you think that you can protect it from anyone else? All of those other boundaries go completely out the window. Okay? So, keep these boundaries intact. You got the time boundary, activity boundary, boundaries against unsolicited advice, and that internal critic. Okay? We spent a lot of time building our shields today. We talked about the courage to say no to the things that drain us, especially in a world that demands so much from us. And also, when we have that internal critic that punishes us with guilt sometimes. But if you ask me, a sustainable life with chronic illness requires more than just defense. It also requires action. Actively using support systems and resources that are around you. Think about it. If you use up all your spoons to defend your time, you'll end up crashing out, or crashing rather, if you don't actively replenish them. So if setting boundaries is about, having the courage to say no to things that drain your spoons, then the next step, asking for help, is about finding the equal and sometimes harder courage to say yes to things that sustain them too. For many of us, and I'll be the first one to admit this, this is even more challenging than just setting boundaries because it actually forces us to confront that deep-rooted fear that we're a burden to other people. And we don't want that at all. We have to let go of the need for total independence and accept that accepting help is not a failure. It's the only way to ensure that we have the energy for the things that truly matter. Now, let's go ahead and nose dive into this next section, all right, about asking for help. See, I think the biggest wall we hit when it comes to asking for help, though, is that internalized narrative that says, I'm a burden or I should be able to do this by myself. I think we've been taught a powerful lie in this society, that independence is the only measure of your worth and needing help is a sign of weakness or defeat. We'd rather struggle in silence and deplete our spoons than admit that we can't do it at all. But if you ask me, I think we actually need to change that perspective. That internal narrative is an old relic, an ancient relic of your pre-illness life. And it no longer serves you any purpose for your survival right now. I need you to listen to me and listen to me really good here, okay? Choosing to ask for help is not an admission to defeat. It's an intelligent and courageous act of self-advocacy. You're not saying, oh, well, I failed. No, you're saying, I value my long-term health more than my short-term pride. Kick to the chest, right? You're making a strategic decision to allocate your limited energy to the task only you can do. Like managing your symptoms or attending appointments. Okay? This isn't laziness. This is the highest level of chronic illness management. Here's another powerful reframe. When you allow a loved one to help you, you're giving them a gift. I think my dad told me something like that. Healthy relationships are only a two-way street. And when one person is living with chronic illness, the roles shift. People who care about you want to help. They want to. But they often feel useless because they can't fix the core problem. By making a specific request, you're giving them a concrete, meaningful way to show their love. They want to show love, guys. You're giving them a job to do. This prevents their burnout and resentment that often comes from, watching you struggle in silence. What you're actually saying is, I trust you to be a part of my care, and believe me, that's a massive display of intimacy. Again, you have to let go of the need for total independence and accept that Accepting help is the only way to ensure that you have energy for the things that really matters to you. And here's some more accountability while we're at it. We all know that we have to ask for help. But how many times have you been offered the vague, well-meaning phrase, let me know if you need anything? To be honest, that phrase to me is practically useless. You know why? Because it puts the entire burden of needing help, and then articulating it and then making the request known back onto the person with the limited spoons. You have to use precious energy to solve the how can I help problem. Well, here's a solution to that then. Why don't we try, being specific when we're asking? Because a lot of times I think this helps to create a more successful support system for you. And I think one way is by, making the request, small and manageable. I think the easier task, the less internal resistance you will have about asking. And it'll be easier for the helper to say, yeah. So instead of saying something like, I need groceries this week, you could try saying, can you grab a gallon of milk and my prescriptions when you go to the store for me today? I think that's super helpful. It's very specific. Or you could say something like, I need help around the house. Instead of saying that, you can say, could you fold the laundry while we talk? Don't just mention the need. Link it to an opportunity where the helper is already doing something similar. All right? I think that's another one. This helps to make the request feel, like a small detour, not a major imposition. Okay? You can say, another example would be like, since you're driving past the post office tomorrow anyway, would you mind dropping off this letter? Right? It's on their way. It won't take too much, right? I even read an article where someone created a help list and, they put it on their refrigerator or even on their phone for those days when they have those bad flare-ups or even when they come from surgery, When you have someone who comes to you and says, hey, let me know how can I help, you can just tell them, hey, look, man, I got a list of small tasks. If you wouldn't mind, you can choose one and do it in 30 minutes or so. This helps to remove that labor, that emotional labor, if you will, of thinking, and it gives the helper a feeling of empowerment because they can actually choose something that they feel confident in doing, right? You don't want to give the person who's going to help you a task that they're not too good at. Like if they can't cook and you want them to hook up some plantain and stew chicken, that's not really going to work out too well, okay? So the specific ask strategy, it's not about getting everything done. It's about making sure your limited spoons are spent on your health, not on coordinating everyone else's efforts, okay? So don't be selfish with it, because I know how some of you guys can get out there. Oh man, we've talked about a lot today. We talked about the strategic no, the courageous yes, and the emotional battles that both of these words can ignite sometimes. But I want to close this section with a reflection on what this hard work can actually buy you. It can buy you some peace. Living with CKD, especially in my case, stage 4, GFR 24 to 30 and all that. I thought courage was pushing through the fatigue, trying to mask the symptoms and trying to act like a person who didn't have chronic illness. While I'm not on dialysis though, I think this stage carries its own unique exhaustion. My kidneys are trying to work overtime just to keep me up, and that feeling, that bone deep tiredness that sleep doesn't touch, yeah, that's pretty much my baseline. I used to nod and smile when someone gave me unsolicited advice. And I'd stay 2 hours longer than I had spoons for because I didn't want to be that person who ruined or missed out on the flex. I was prioritizing everyone else's vibe, over my own ability to manage. And what did that get me? It made me feel resentment. It got me crashing for days. And more dangerously, it got me lab numbers that were worse. My doctor always stresses that stress and physical overexertion can damage the remaining function of my kidney. Every time I overspend my energy budget, I wasn't just risking a bad night's sleep. I was risking a faster slide towards dialysis. I had to learn, through painful trial and error, that protecting my peace is the most critical element of my CKD management plan. It's more important than any single medication and just as vital as my diet. This whole process, setting the time boundary, enforcing the activity boundary, and using specific ask strategy, it's all fundamental about declaring your worth to your own body. It's looking your internal critic straight in the eye and saying, my remaining kidney function is precious. I'm a person who deserves rest. I'm a person whose energy is not up for negotiation because its conservation is directly tied to my overall health outcome. See, when I finally started doing this, the mental clutter for managing everyone else's feelings began to fade. That internal debate over whether I was lazy or selfish finally lost its power. See, asking for help was no longer a personal failure. It became a strategic move that allowed me to save my spoons for the people and things that truly nourish me, whether that's a quiet dinner with my family or the energy I need to prepare for my next round of appointments. This whole work of defending your spoon, it's tough, bro. I'm not even gonna lie to you. It's not a magic pill. It's none of that. Okay, you'll likely feel awkward. You might disappoint someone, and even your own internal voice will scream at you to apologize. But on the other side of that temporary discomfort is a sustainable life, though. A life where you are the priority. That is the quiet courage we all need to cultivate. And that is the peace that you deserve. Once again, peeps, I just want to thank you for joining me for this challenging but necessary conversation. We started by acknowledging that the advice in this episode to set boundaries and ask for help is going to cause some friction. All right, don't think you'll be escaped from it. You just expect it, okay? But as we've established, that friction is a small, temporary price of peace and survival. Remember the tools that we forged today. Boundaries, time, activity, and the crucial one against that internal critic of yours. Those are all shields against that boom and bust cycle. And also, asking for help is not a sign of failure. It's an intelligent act of self-advocacy and a gift that you give those who want to support you. This work of prioritizing your health over other people's comfort, it's the most courageous thing that you can do for your body and your future. So keep practicing. Trust me, it gets easier. Now, after all that, we need a little bit of inspiration, okay? Next time on the Chronic Brew, we have an incredible guest who puts all of this into perspective. We'll be talking with a working farmer who manages his farm schedule around his dialysis treatments. We'll discuss how he enforces boundaries in a physically demanding job, who he asks for help, and how he uses his journey to cope with the mental and physical stress of his daily reality. Friendly reminder, if you'd like to connect with me and the Chronic Brew on social media, you can follow me on Instagram at MrCoolBeans2889 and on TikTok at Mr.Cool.Beans. Until then, go put on a song that makes your soul feel seen. You're doing the absolute best that you can with the limited spoons that you have. This is the Chronic Brew. I'm Mr. Cool Beans. We'll chop it up again soon. Alright? Peace.